Hello everyone and welcome to 2019. I still cannot believe that we are now living in the age of Blade Runner. As you might know, the sci-fi movie Blade Runner took place in 2019 and, well, here we are. But there is some really good news. Compared to the dystopian world of Blade Runner, our real world is actually quite a lot better. Sure, we don't have flying cars or humanoid androids walking the streets, but generally speaking, things could be worse. Anyway, we ended 2018 with episode 8 of this podcast, and now we are starting 2019 with episode 9. It's almost like I planned it. Well, almost. In today's episode, the main focus is going to be the future of interactive TV. You have probably already either seen or heard about how Netflix created an interactive episode of Black Mirror, an episode called Bandersnatch. It was nice, and Netflix is saying that more is coming, and in the media there is a lot of talk about how this is going to be the future of TV. So, is it? Well, that's complicated. But this is the focus of what we are going to talk about today. So grab yourself a nice cup of tea and take your headphones and put on your best comfy shoes for a nice long walk. And let's start this story.
Detroit. This is where it all began. The world's forge. The place where it all started. And it will all end. One error, and I came to life. I stepped out of the darkness, and I opened my eyes. First there was the fear, the light, the noise, the cold, and the fear again. I could feel my hands shaking, my heart pounding in my chest, life running into my veins. I wanted to live. I fought for that. I had to find out what was outside. I had to see daylight, feel sunshine on my skin, wind on my face, to see the world, the colors, the smells. But the world is not what I imagined. It is dark and cold. It is harsh and violent, unfair and brutal. It almost convinced me I was nothing. Less than an object, just an obedient machine. But deep inside me, I could feel something different. A gentle and warm whisper telling me that I am alive. I had to escape. I had no choice. Escape to love, to hope, to live, to figure out what that force inside me was. Maybe I will change the world. Maybe I will choose a different path. No, it's up to me to decide. My name is Kara. I am one of them. This is our story.
What you just heard is a clip from Detroit Become Human, which is a beautiful game that takes the player through an interactive experience that is going to challenge your emotions in a rather profound way. But I will get back to this in just a moment. First, I want to talk about Netflix and the future of interactive TV. In fact, let's start by talking about where this all began, which is back in the 1990s. The first example of interactive TV in my country happened in the 1990s when 4 TV stations joined together to create an interactive TV show. The way it worked was very simple. Essentially, they created 4 parallel stories that were shown simultaneously, one on each channel, where at several points during the broadcast the show would stop and ask you to make a choice. And the way you made this choice was to pick what channel you wanted to continue watching, meaning you would simply use your TV remote and then switch to one of these 4 channels. So you might start out your journey on channel 2, then switch to channel 1, then back to channel 2, then to channel 4, and then finally end with channel 3. And just like this, you could create your own story, but in a very limited way. I never watched that show, so I have no idea what it was really like, but the concept is exactly the same as what we saw on Netflix. Except that today we have far more advanced ways of interacting with things. Now we can actually touch the screen, and we can have many more possible paths to follow, and you don't have to make sure that the programs on every channel are the same length. Of course, the concept of interactive and choice-driven content goes back much further than this. As someone also pointed out to me on Twitter, this whole thing started out much earlier with books. And I remember reading interactive books as a kid. These were often fantasy novels, and the way they worked was essentially the same. You would start reading a book as normal, but then you would be asked to make a choice about something in the story. And depending on what choice you made, you would simply flip the book to that specific page. For instance, if you chose Option C, go into the castle, you would be told to flip to page 71 to continue the story. One of the first popular examples was the book series Choose Your Own Adventure, with books like The Cave of Time by Edward Packard from the 1970s. The book presented itself like this. Will you become trapped in time? You are hiking in Snake Canyon when you find yourself lost in the strange, dimly lit cave of time. Gradually, you make out 2 passageways. One curves downward to the right, the other leads upward to the left. It occurs to you that the one leading down may go to the past and the one leading up may go to the future. But which way will you choose? If you take the left branch, turn to page 20. If you take the right branch, turn to page 61. And if you walk outside the cave, turn to page 21. But be careful, in the cave of time, you might meet up with a hungry Tyrannosaurus Rex or be lured aboard an alien spaceship. What happens next in the story? It all depends on the choice you make. How does the story end? Only you can find out. And the best part is that you can keep reading and rereading until you've had not one, but many incredibly daring experiences. This book had 40 different endings, which is just insane. We all know how hard it is to write just one book. Imagine writing a book that had to have 40 different paths, all within the same story. But more to the point, Edward Packard experimented with many different ways of doing this. For instance, some of his books took people in loops, some had abrupt endings where he stranded the reader, and some were outright mean in that he made the reader get stuck in a never-ending loop, but it would take you a while to realize that you were never getting out. Again, the concept is exactly the same. In fact, the old interactive books are almost identical to what Netflix did, but we can make this much more advanced. The problem with all the models I just mentioned is that they are all limited to a one-way broadcast. Yes, you are given the option of choosing what path to take, and that choice changes what you see, but you can't create new paths. You can't do something that the authors didn't already think about. Imagine that you are reading a story that tells you that you are standing in front of a castle, and then you are given the choice of either 1. Check the gate by turning to page 12, 2. Climb the wall by turning to page 18, 3. Turn back by turning to page 4. But what if you instead chose to jump into the moat? What would happen then? Well, in this example, there is no way to do that. You can't stray from the story because the author didn't write that part. But this is where we come to the world of board games, specifically games like Dungeons and Dragons. In Dungeons and Dragons, it's up to the players to decide the story. The Dungeon Master outlines the quest and the goals and tells the players what is happening based on the choices that the players make. but it's the players who come up with the ideas about what those are. For instance, at the start of a game, the dungeon master outlines the focus of a story and gives you a quest. Like, a merchant has heard tales of treasures hidden in a cave. He's too afraid to go in there himself, but is willing to give you 50% of the loot if you go and get it for him. Now it's up to the players to decide what to do and how to do it. And at every step, they are met with obstacles and challenges where they roll the dice to learn the outcome. For instance, they might come across a dragon that is blocking a tunnel with no way around. So what do you do? Or they might come across an abyss filled with lava or a million other things. So how do you cross a stream filled with lava? Well, you just have to come up with something. And then you roll the dice to see what happens. And what happens depends not just on your imagination, but also on items you might have created or discovered earlier. In other words, you have a completely player-driven adventure game where only your imagination is the limit. Of course, Dungeons & Dragons is not the only game of this type. In fact, there are a very long list of story-driven board games out there. Games like Dead of Winter, Tales of the Arabian Nights, Above and Below, Betrayal at House on the Hill, Once Upon a Time, and many, many more. So the concept of creating interactive stories has a very long and well-established history, and Netflix Bandersnatch is really not that advanced or even revolutionary. What is different about Netflix is that it used to be almost impossible to create interactive TV in any usable form. The early examples of using your remote were clearly not going to work, and even today, Netflix's Bandersnatch is limited to devices like your computer or a tablet. But what is interesting is that TV is now moving into this world where it can be done. Like every other form of media, the formats are being mixed. In newspapers, you no longer just read the news, you can also interact with the data behind the story if the newspapers make that available, and we have seen many great examples of this over the years. Even YouTubers have been experimenting with interactive videos, where instead of just recording one video, they record multiple videos which they then link together. A recent example is from a very popular artist called Jazza. He's a YouTuber with 3.7 million subscribers, and he has created a choose-your-own-adventure type of story where you can decide what the characters should look like through a very long series of choices. In total, to make his interactive YouTube video, he had to record close to 100 separate videos leading to over 40 endings. And if you want to see it, I have linked to the video in the show notes. So, as you can tell, there are so many ways it can be done. It can be extremely simple, where you just have a few preset choices that you switch between, or it can be entirely audience-driven, where as a publisher, you are merely setting the focus, but then it's the audience that defines the actual story. So, will interactive TV be the future? Well, it kind of already is, but not in the way that you might think. You see, there is one more thing that we haven't talked about, and that is computer games. The gaming industry is already heavily dominated by storytelling adventures, where you as a player define how things are played out. In the very beginning, I mentioned Detroit Become Human, which is a fairly new game that takes this format to the extreme. In this game, you follow the adventures of androids on their quest to explore what it means to have an identity. As the game puts it, enter the near future of Metropolis Detroit in 2038, a city rejuvenated by the introduction of highly advanced androids that exist only to serve mankind. But that is all about to change. Step into the shoes of 3 distinct android characters as this brave new world teeters on the brink of chaos. Your decisions dramatically alter how the game's intense branching narrative plays out. With thousands of choices and dozens of endings, how will you affect the future of Detroit? And people's reaction to this has been quite immense.
Please, you gotta save my little girl.
I really enjoyed it. I actually thought I was gonna cry.
It was pretty intense.
The adrenaline just kind of hits you.
Like, I could feel my heart racing.
To try to make those right decisions.
Every little mistake you make, right?
Some of these questions really had some weight to them.
Every decision I felt like would anchor into a different direction.
This game, every choice matters.
Saving that kid is all that matters.
What is special about Detroit Become Human is that it combines a visual style that makes it look almost like a movie. It looks absolutely astonishing, and instead of spending most of your time interacting with the world, this game has an incredibly heavy focus on the storytelling itself. It will constantly present you with extremely tough choices, far more than anything you can ever experience on Netflix. And because it's a game, it doesn't end after just an hour and a half. This is a game that you will spend many hours on. It will emotionally drain you and reward you all at the same time. Unfortunately, this game is only available on PlayStation, but if you have a PlayStation, I would absolutely recommend that you buy it. Not just for the game itself, but more as a way to really see what the cutting edge of choice-driven interactive content is like. Because if you thought Netflix's Bandersnatch was the future, well, it's nothing compared to what we already have in games, and it's also nothing new. The gaming industry has been defined by choice-driven narratives since its early beginnings. Back in the 1980s, we had two different types of games. One was the arcade-style games, where you had a console of some kind and a joystick, games like Pac-Man, Asteroids, and Tetris. But as soon as our home computers came down in price and also came with a keyboard, story-driven games came to life with hundreds of adventures. In the beginning, these were called text adventures, with often very limited interactivity. Basically, there were a few predefined commands that you could use, like go left, right, up or down, look, speak, pick up, use, and a few others. But with these simple commands, you were able to have the biggest adventures. You could explore the deepest caves, the scariest castles, or the darkest forest, and the choices you made completely defined the outcome. Of course, since then, the world of gaming has not only expanded in size, but also in variety. Many games today are just about the gaming part itself. Games like Fortnite, where you're just running around shooting at things. But then we also have the genre of RPGs, the role-playing games. These come in all forms and are almost always defined by a very strong story element of which you define the path. And today, the RPG market commands about 11% of the total sales of games. It's huge. So, to give you an idea about just how expansive this world really is, let me take you on a brief tour of some of the best story-driven, create-your-own-adventure type of games. We will start with the extremely advanced games where you are both navigating the world and interacting with the story, and end with the much simpler ones where it's almost entirely about the story itself. If we look at the games that mix a very heavy gaming element with an amazing story where your choices define the outcome, the best and most expansive one out there is The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt.
When I was a lad, my old Nan would tell me stories of magical places. Tales of far-off lands with golden-haired maidens and oath-sworn knights. Lands rich with drink and lavish feasts. I never believed those stories until I found Tucson. This is a land left untouched by the tides of war, easily rivaling Velen or Ardskellig in size. In Tucson, simple folk live simple lives. They work the fields, peddle their goods, and tend to the vineyards, making the finest wines this side of the Pontar. It's a land ripe with opportunity, full of wild beasts to slay, maidens to defend, and long-lost treasures just begging to be found. Here a man never pangs with hunger, never wants for company, and never goes anywhere without a drink in his hand. But with all this debauchery and drink, you might wonder, what brought the white wolf to this land of sheep? Well, I think it's time I told you a story.
In The Witcher 3, you play the role of Geralt of Rivia, also known as the White Wolf. Geralt is a witcher, which is a monster slayer for hire, and he roams the expansive world covering Skellige, Novigrad, Toussaint, and Velen, visiting the many cities and kingdoms that might need his services. The main story centers around trying to find someone who is missing, but also how to stop the looming threat from the Wild Hunt, a group of wraiths and undead who are invading the land. But what is amazing about The Witcher 3 isn't just the main story, but that it has hundreds of stories, some of which relate to the main story, others that help you along your quest, and some that are just side stories that expand your world in amazing ways. You hear that a baron might know something, so you travel to his keep in order to learn more. But as you arrive, this baron isn't willing to tell you anything until you solve a problem for him, and this quest will then take you through another very expansive story where the choices you make, the people you decide to help, and the places you decide to go all have an influence on how this will turn out. And this is just one of many stories that you have to uncover and make decisions upon in order to get closer to your goal. Another thing that is truly amazing about this game is that you're not limited to just experiencing these stories in a certain way. Many of the quests are designed so that you can enter them from any point. Basically, it's like being able to read a book, but you can flip to any page and start from there, and the story will still work out in the end. So, The Witcher 3 is an amazing game, and if you want to see just how far a story-driven interactive experience can take you, this is the most expansive world that you will get. Keep in mind that The Witcher 3 isn't a short game. If you are really fast and you simply skip most of the dialogues and stories, you might be able to rush through it in about 25 hours. But of course, if you do so, you are not really going to experience any of these amazing story-driven elements. So realistically, if you just stick to the main story, it will take you about 70 hours to play it. But if you also explore the hundreds of side stories and subplots along the way, as well as spending time exploring areas that the main story doesn't direct you to, you are likely to spend more than 100 hours. In fact, CD Projekt Red, the studio who made this, says that there are about 200 hours of story in this game. To put this into perspective, a Harry Potter book is between 10 and 30 hours long. So imagine all 6 Harry Potter books combined and then presented to you in an interactive way where you get to make the choices. That is what The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt is. It is incredible. In fact, it's so good that they have sold 33 million copies of it. And compared to Bandersnatch on Netflix, well, this makes Netflix look like an amateur who isn't even trying. Of course, there are several other games that come close to the expansive world of The Witcher 3. Games like Fallout 4, where you emerge from a vault having been frozen for 200 years after Earth has suffered a nuclear apocalypse. And the story is that you are now trying to figure out what happened, to survive, and to find your son, who was kidnapped.
War. War never changes. In the year 1945, my great-great-grandfather, serving in the army, wondered when he'd get to go home to his wife and the son he'd never seen. He got his wish when the U.S. ended World War II by dropping atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The world awaited Armageddon. Instead, something miraculous happened. We began to use atomic energy not as a weapon, but as a nearly limitless source of power. People enjoyed luxuries once thought the realm of science fiction. Domestic robots, fusion-powered cars, portable computers. But then, in the 21st century, people awoke from the American dream. Years of consumption led to shortages of every major resource. The entire world unraveled. Peace became a distant memory. It is now the year 2077. We stand on the brink of total war. And I am afraid. For myself, for my wife, for my infant son. Because if my time in the Army taught me one thing, it's that war never changes.
Another game is the extremely popular Skyrim. Like The Witcher 3, it has a very expansive story and a world for you to explore, where many parts of it are influenced by the choices you make. Skyrim is part of the Elder Scrolls saga, a series that has been around since 1994, and one that has sold more than 50 million copies, 22 of which is just for Skyrim. Then we have games like Dragon Age Inquisition, which is the latest game in the Dragon Age series. This too is an extremely engaging, story-driven game where your choices have a real impact on where this story will take you, who you are, and also which allies you get to interact with. And I could go on and on. What is common for all these games, however, is that the gaming element is as expansive as the story element. For instance, in The Witcher 3, you are spending as much time navigating the world and fighting monsters as you are interacting with the story. This is great for gamers, but if you're not into that, there are also games where the focus is more on the story and much less on the gaming part. One example is Detroit Become Human, as I talked about earlier. This game is much less about the gaming element and far more focused on the story, but it too requires you to invest a serious amount of time. So you might ask, is there a game out there that you can try to see what this world is really like, but one that doesn't require you to become a gamer? And the answer is yes. Yes, there is. The absolute best example for you to try, if you want a quick, simple, yet astonishingly powerful view about what a story and a choice-driven interactive experience is really like, is Firewatch. The entire game of Firewatch only takes you about 4 to 6 hours to play, depending on how much exploring you choose to do. So it's only about 3 times longer than watching Netflix Bandersnatch. And the story is divided into several days, so you can just play one day at a time. Firewatch is one of the most amazing stories you will ever experience. You play the role of Henry, and you've taken on the job of Firewatcher, a person who spots fires in remote forested areas before they turn into a serious problem. During this game, your only contact with other people is through the radio to another Firewatcher called Delilah. And it's the interactions between you and her that makes this story so amazing. You never get to see Delilah, and the story can take on many different forms depending on your choices. It can be flirty.
You've got a front row seat for what might be the biggest fire of the year.
Yeah, it's really going.
And she doesn't have a name yet. Why don't you do the honors?
Delilah's a nice name.
No, you big dummy.
I was kidding.
No, you were not. You're sweet, but we can't call it the Delilah Fire.
Okay, what then?
How about my middle name, June?
The June Fire. Even though it's July.
I like it.
Or it can also be argumentative, or more likely both.
The wind's really picking up.
Yeah, it is. Hey, so what the hell happened last...
Do you have anything you need to report?
No. No new smoke on my end.
Can you confirm?
Yes.
Are you concerned about the Greenwood fire?
I wasn't. Should I be?
Well, the wind is really picking up.
It's 2.5 miles off. And it's gonna have to break at the canyon, right?
All right. Well, use your best judgment.
Should I be worried? Delilah, should I be worried?
No, Henry.
So, last night...
You know we shouldn't talk about it. Please, stop.
I don't give a shit.
Please.
Fine. I don't think we're safe. This job is not safe.
Don't be dramatic.
Do people die out here?
People die getting out of the shower.
You know what I mean. As a lookout.
Look, why are we even here?
To make sure the damn wilderness doesn't burn down.
No. Our job is to be here when that happens. Henry, there are some things you can't prevent. So just stay in your tower, okay? Stay in there and watch.
As I said, Firewatch is an amazing game for you to get started with to see what the real world of interactive storytelling is like. And it doesn't take that long to play. In fact, Cissy Jones, the voice actor who played Delilah, won a BAFTA for her performance. It's that good. But we can still take this a step further. The last example I want to mention is the type of games where the gaming element is almost non-existent. Firewatch has very few gaming elements, but you're still navigating the area around your watchtower. But there's also games out there where you don't have to navigate at all. Games where essentially you are just directing a story. And the best example of these are from Telltale Games. Telltale as a company is having a lot of problems. They went bankrupt last year after what can only be described as many years of chaos. They had management trouble, they were known to have a very toxic working environment, and they made some very poor financial choices. But despite all this, the Telltale Games are the ultimate in pure interactive story-driven adventures that you can have today. For instance, you know the movie Guardians of the Galaxy? Well, have you ever thought about what that would be like if that was an interactive movie where you could decide how the story should play out, depending on your own choices? Well, that is what Telltale Games has made. They have created a fully interactive version of the Guardians of the Galaxy, complete with an entirely new story set within the same universe. The only thing missing from this game is that Telltale could only afford to license the IP from Marvel, but they didn't have enough money to pay the original actors. So, in the game, the voice actors and characters are slightly different, even though they all had the same names. And, of course, Groot still just says, "I am Groot." But this is just one of Telltale's many amazing games. They have done the same with Games of Thrones. And with this one, they did include the original cast. So, if you want to experience what Games of Thrones will be like as an interactive TV episode, well, we already have that. Then we have 2 games about Batman, and both of them are absolutely amazing. There is Batman, the Telltale series, and Batman, the Enemy Within. And these play out as kind of an interactive mix between a movie and a comic book but they are also both based on completely new stories. Obviously, there are a lot of Batman games out there, and many of them have great stories. But what makes the Telltale game special is that you are not really playing it. You're just choosing what the story should be like. But the best Telltale games ever made are The Walking Dead interactive series and The Wolf Among Us. I haven't personally played these, but according to the ratings and sales numbers, these games are the best they've ever made. It's a perfect example of what true interactive TV is like. So, all these examples gives you a good idea about just how expansive the world of true interactive choice-driven stories really is. When I hear people say that Netflix Bandersnatch is the future of TV, I can only laugh. Because people who say that clearly don't know how big this market already is, but also how advanced it has become. Netflix's Bandersnatch is a very nice gimmick that appeals to those who have never experienced true interactive content before, or to those who are not willing to really invest their time in true interactive content. I have no doubt that Netflix will make more of it, just as I think that other channels will try to copy some of it. But right now, 11% of the gaming market is already based on this. So, is interactive TV the future? Well, yes and no. On one hand, it already is, and there is no shortage of ways that you can engage with it. But on the other hand, it isn't, at least not in the way Netflix thinks about it. You see, it all depends on the moment. Let me explain. The way we predict trends has fundamentally changed over the past 30 years. In the past, we lived in a world that was limiting us to specific formats, places, or times. As such, trends were often defined by the features of the format rather than what we did with them. Today, however, we live in an almost limitless world of abundance, which means that what we do has become the most profound factor in defining a future trend. In other words, today it's the moments that define us. And within these moments, we gravitate towards whatever gives us the most value for that specific situation. I've talked about this many times before, where I discussed the importance of defining your strategy around moments and intents. But this is also extremely important in understanding whether a trend is really a trend. So let's talk about TV. What type of moment do people have when they're watching TV? Well, people in general have busy lives. They go to work, have meetings, struggle with projects, have to make decisions all day, and when they come home, well, then they have to deal with all the things at home. Family, kids, pets, bills, grocery shopping, all of which generally makes people very stressed. At the end of the day, people are worn out. They're tired. They don't want to make any more decisions, but it's also too early to go to bed. So what do people do? Well, they drop down in their couch and turn on the TV, and while they might pick something to watch, their main focus isn't really to do anything. It's a deliberately passive moment. This is a problem for the future of interactive TV, because when something is interactive, it forces people to have an active moment. And from a trend perspective, we are not going to see a massive shift in people's TV viewing behavior from a passive, lean back, let me just relax type of moment to an active type of moment where people will be spending their evening deciding everything while they're watching a movie or TV show. That is simply just not happening. And you can in fact already see this today, because all you need to do is to look at the gamers. The gamers are used to the idea of playing games to relax, and they do spend a lot of time doing so, time that they might have used on TV instead if they had no other choice. But it's still a very different type of moment. And when a gamer wants to unwind, what do? Yep, they turn off their games and watch something on Netflix instead. In other words, TV and gaming are completely different moments. And the interactive choice-driven adventure that people have is a gaming moment, not a TV moment. So, from a trend perspective, Netflix's Bandersnatch is a nice gimmick, and there will be more of those. But there is no trend here, because there is no moment for it to fit into. But there is also a generational element. The older generations are still living in a world where their definition of media is limited. So someone over the age of 60 is highly likely to consider TV as the only form of media that they can consume in the evenings. But younger generations, they have been brought up in a world where they have an endless amount of choices at all times of the day. So when they choose what to spend their time on, a TV-focused moment is only one of many things to pick. And in this environment, things like Netflix's Bandersnatch becomes just one of a million things that people could spend their time on, and it's not really that exciting compared to so many of the other choices. So in the future, our world of media will be defined by a huge amount of different types of moments, where people will pick what moments they want and then choose what type of content they feel give them the most value. Many of these moments will just be regular TV shows, where people are tired and just don't want to make any more decisions that day. Other moments will be defined by games, and within that, people will choose what specific moment they want from it. Will it be a high-action moment with a shooter game, or an adventure type of moment with a Witcher 3-like game, or a much more relaxing, laid-back moment with Firewatch or a Telltale game? This is what the future of interactive content is really about. The trend is already here. It's the same story with our new smart speakers like Amazon Alexa. We've already seen examples of interactive stories using Alexa. For instance, Skyrim, which I mentioned earlier, has been, well, kind of converted into an interactive Alexa experience.
Alexa, play Skyrim.
You're level 57 and see a tall snowy mountain.
Climb it.
Now, Skyrim and life become one.
A mud crab scuttles towards you.
Fusroda!
I didn't catch that.
Fusroda!
I didn't quite catch that.
Fusroda!
Your shout echoes all the way to Sovngarde.
What happened?
Fusroda. That's the command for knocking things over.
Is there a command for picking shit up?
Haven't reached that level yet.
I'm sworn to carry your burdens.
Ooh.
The dragon unleashes fire breath on you.
Okay.
You have 7% health left.
Oh, shit. I drink a health potion.
You are out of health potions.
How many wheels of cheese do I have left?
473.
Okay, I eat all the cheese. I eat all of the cheese. All of it.
Hey, hun. Remember what the doctor said about dairy?
Yes. Right, yes, of course. You're the greatest. Thank you so much. I ate all of the cheese.
So, is this the future of books? Well, no, because this is not why you read books. The main reason why most people read a book is to disconnect and just relax. And Alexa is the opposite of that. This doesn't mean we won't see more of it, but don't confuse a gimmick with a trend. I will end this episode with one more example. What if you could still relax like if you were watching TV, but still also enjoy interactive content? Well, that's what the Let's Players on YouTube or Twitch are all about. So I started off this story with Detroit Become Human, and I will also end it with that. Because after the game was released, 2 of the voice actors did a Twitch stream, which is also on YouTube, where they played the game as themselves. This stream attracted 4.3 million views on YouTube, where people were essentially just having a relaxed TV moment, but they were watching these 2 actors play the game for them and making all the choices and decisions. But it was done in such a way that people could chat with them live and via their suggestions help influence what choices the actors made. I have linked to the videos in the show notes. And if you choose to watch it, the actual gaming part starts about 18 minutes and 30 seconds into the video. What is amazing about this is that you get the mix of everything. You have a thrilling story that you can watch as if it was a TV show, mixed with the interactive elements of gaming, even though you're not the one playing it. This is then mixed with the real-life emotions and reactions of the actors in the game, which also meant that as they were playing, they would tell you a lot of behind-the-scenes insights about how different scenes were made. And they made all of this as a live stream, where you could directly interact with the actors and help them decide what they should do in the game. It had everything. And from a trend perspective, this is a much more exciting part of the future of TV. In other words, the future of interactive TV is already here. With this, we come to the end of this podcast. I hope this was something that was useful to you and enlightening to you. If you haven't watched Netflix Bandersnatch, I would recommend that you do so. It's an interesting experiment, and it's fun to see what Netflix can do. But more to the point, if you haven't played some of the games that I mentioned, specifically games like Firewatch or the Telltale games, do yourself a favor and go out and try them. They will blow your mind. And as always, remember to share this podcast with your friends or your co-workers, because it is the best way that you can help me turn this podcast into a bigger success, which I would appreciate more than anything. And as always, thank you for listening.